Hey guys, I hope you all are doing good. In the last lecture, we covered the composition of functions, and in this one, we will be covering the sum of functions, right? This is going to be our last lecture about functions, and then after this, we will be moving on to propositional logic. So, to start with, what is the definition? The sum of functions is a way to combine two functions into one by simply adding their inputs, by simply adding their outputs, right? So let's say we have two functions f of x and g of x. Then the sum of these functions means evaluate those functions at the same input x and then add their values, right? In very simple words, let's say I have this function f of x and g of x. I find their outputs and then I add both of them, right? But there's some important things to note over here. So let's say I have this f of x over here, which is x plus 1, and g of x, which is x squared, right? F plus g of x is simply going to be this equation over here, right? I evaluated both of them and then added their values, right? So I hope that makes sense. Now, the important thing to understand is that input value, this is the important point to understand, right? Input value of intersection of both functions. Let's try to understand this statement, right? Input value should be an element of the intersection of the domain of definition of both functions. This is a very simple thing to understand, right? Think about this function over here, f of x. Let's say the domain for this one is, so let's say I have this function f of x, which is equal to x squared plus 1, and g of x, which is equal to x, right? Let's say this is just x divided by 2. Now, both of them, f goes from all real numbers to the set of all real numbers, and same is with g. So basically, their domain and codomain is all real numbers. But now, if I ask you what is the domain of definition, basically what I'm trying to ask is what what is the set of elements that have an image, right? The answer would be again the set of all real numbers, right? Because think about it, I can input all real numbers into this value, right? Because I'm just squaring them, and I can input all the real numbers into this value x over here because I'm simply dividing it by 2. But now if I make this small change, right? Let's say g of x was x minus 1. Now, even though I can input any real number value into this function f of x and I'll get a resulting value, which is I'll get an image, I cannot input all the real numbers into this function g over here. Why? Think about it, right? I cannot input values which are less than 1 in this case, I should say, right? I can input 1, but as soon as the values are less than 1, this would result into a negative value, and that is undefined, right? Now, if you try to find the sum of these two, right? F of x plus g of x. F of x would be valid, right? In all real numbers, it would be valid, but g of x would not be valid, right? So what's the main important thing to understand is I need to make sure that I add only those values or input only those values which are in the intersection, right? So I hope you understand it. So the basic idea is input value should be the element of the intersection of the domain of definition. In very simple words, what I'm trying to say is as long as this x value has an image in both these functions, this sum of composition is going to be valid. But as soon as in any of these functions there is no image, so for example, x has an image in this function, but it doesn't have an image in this g, right? Then it wouldn't be defined, right? So I'll simply get f of x plus undefined value. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. I should have an image for x in f and also in g as well, right? Okay. Now, let's move on. And I'll be giving a bunch of questions for you guys to solve. And after that, we will be starting with the propositional logic. Okay, so sum of functions was a relatively very small topic. So I only have 2 questions for you guys. But I'll try to add a bunch of questions at the end of the playlist uh, for each and every concept, right? So let's start with question number 1. Given f of x equals 3x plus 2 and g of x equals x square minus x, find f plus g of x, right? Okay. Just a basic consideration, when you're trying to find the sum of functions, just try to figure out whether the domain of definition is equal. Like if there's any restrictions to the elements that you can input over here. Now, 3x plus 2, there's no restriction, right? I can input all the real numbers into this equation. It doesn't matter. And same is with this over here, right? There's no restriction. So I simply do f of x plus g of x, which is equal to 3x plus 2 plus x square minus x. So I get x square plus 2x plus 2, right? 2x plus 2, yeah. Okay, moving on. Now this is an important question to solve, right? Given f of x equals 1 by x minus 2 and g of x equals the square root of x plus 1, what is the domain of the sum of the functions? Now let's try to understand what is the domain of definition. I should say, so this question should be domain of definition. Okay. I'll be adding a bunch of things to the question. I missed writing them down. F is from all real numbers to the set of all real numbers, and G is also from the set of all real numbers to the set of all real numbers, right? Let's try to solve this question. Now, what is the domain of definition? Basically means all those elements that are going to have an image, right? Think about this over here. When do you think 1 by x minus 2 can be undefined? Is there any value where this can be undefined? Now, if you remember rational numbers, there's one single condition where rational numbers can be undefined, right? It is when there's a 0 in the denominator. So if there's a 0 in the denominator of this equation, this value is going to be undefined. So I cannot allow 1 by 0. This is not allowed. When do we think this would be 1 by 0? When the value x is equal to 2. So the basic conclusion that I get is I cannot input the value 2 into this equation. If I do it, then I get an undefined value, right? So 2 is out of my list of domain of definition. That's very clear, right? Now let's take a look at what is going to be g of x. The basic point is g of x is square root of x plus 1, meaning the values that I input over here should result in a positive entire value. So that means if I input a value -1, this would result in a 0, so that's fine. But if I input a value which is less than -1 in this case, then it's going to result in a negative entire value, right? And that is going to be undefined. So I cannot input 2 into the equation, 2 not allowed, and all the numbers -infinity, -1 should be not allowed in this case, right? So 2 is not allowed and all the numbers from -infinity. So this equation basically means all the numbers from -infinity to -1, but not including -1 in this case, right? So they're not going to be allowed. Basic point is I cannot input values into the equation for which the result is going to be undefined, right? So I hope you were able to understand this question. So my simple answer is going to be from, so these are the values which are not allowed, right? So it's simply going to be, domain of definition is going to be -1 to the value 2, not including the value 2, union with not including the value 2 to positive infinity. Right, so this is going to be my entire answer for this question. Now this is a very tricky question to understand but I hope you were able to solve it.